Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is co-host Daniel McAdams. And Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Well, very good. And today we're going to do something a little bit differently. We're going to deal with two items. And the first item we're going to be talking about is the question of whether or not the Russians are still using an air base in Iran to bomb Syria, which is significant, and there's some questions about that now. And the other item is a working paper for the Federal Reserve came up with the astounding prediction that they better prepare for the next bailout of another $4 trillion. That's significant, too. They've pumped in that much already, and they're already planning for the next one. But anyway, on the first item, there's contrary articles about this. It's only been a week ago, I guess, when they started using an Iranian base to bomb Syria. And it seemed to be not a big deal. Nobody was yelling and screaming. We knew the Iranians and the Russians were invited by Assad to help save his regime, and it was in their interest to do so. So it wasn't a surprise that they're allies. Everybody knew that. But all of a sudden, we started seeing articles here just in the last 24 hours. And one major article with a major headline from the New York Times. And it claims Iran revokes Russia's use of the airbase. I mean, this is, outright clear cut. It revokes. But as we delved into this, it doesn't look like that as absolutely, because they claim that a spokesman for the Foreign Affairs Office, said this, and we're not sure where this came from. And you'll comment on that, I'm sure. But also, there was something on Radio Free Europe that said the Laranjani, the Speaker of the Parliament, said, no, this isn't true. This deal is still on and it's still happening. They're mainly refueling, but we're close friends. And but I found it interesting when they asked, what's the United States position? What do they know? And they said, well, it's just not clear. Well, that's about right. I think we spend up to $80 billion on surveillance. They know everything that we do, but it's not clear to the United States government really what's going on. And they're probably telling the truth. To them, it probably wasn't clear because they didn't tell us a week before it was going to happen. So Al Jazeera, which is another source, says it's definitely stopped. So we have all these conflicting reports. It is significant. It isn't the end that ends all, on the skirmishes and the wars that are potentially going to be started over there. But I think it's significant. So what about the headline on the New York Times? First off, Iran revokes Russia's use of the airbase. But whom are we going to believe?
It really does have the whiff of disinformation, this whole thing, because, when this was announced a few days ago, it was a significant development. This is a development of a real strategic partnership for Russia to be able to use a base that's so much closer to Syria to bomb. And this is mostly around Aleppo, which is where really the Al-Qaeda has its last stand. And if they're defeated there, it really will be a big blow for the insurrection. So them able to use the base is a big deal, and I think panic and alarm bells were going off in Washington. And then all of a sudden you see these stories, which, when I first saw it, I thought, wow, something big must have happened. And, we were preparing for the show, and I started reading it because I want to find out, okay, where is the declaration? What exactly did the Iranian government say? And nowhere in this New York Times story is there a definitive quote. There's a general who said, they were behaving a little bit ungentlemanly by bragging about it. But that was it. There was just no source.
Well, it seems to me then Laranjani might be the closest to being the official spokesman for the Iranians, and he says we're still doing it, and we're still, working, together to, to save Assad from the foreigners that are coming in. But it seems like there are some people who would like to create divisiveness and show, well, the Russians aren't getting along with the Iranians and stir up trouble, stir up the factions within Iran, because there's never uniform beliefs on all these issues. So maybe they're trying to make things look a lot worse than really they are.
Pepe Escobar coined the term, I think he coined the term, the empire of chaos. And it seems more like that, more likely. On the one hand, as you point out, they want to highlight, the mainstream media and the U.S. government wants to highlight the infighting between Russia and Iran. But on the other hand, U.S. policies are driving them into each other's arms when it comes to Syria. Neither Russia nor Iran want to see al-Qaeda take over, which is the U.S. is backing by proxy and indirectly and even directly. None of them want to see this, so why are they pushing them into their arms? Look at the Denver Post said, Obama and the U.S. should be alarmed by Russia's operating out of Iran. But why, if they're hitting al-Qaeda and ISIS and taking them out, why should we be alarmed? We should be happy. It'll save us the jet fuel.
Well, I think just yesterday or so, we saw that our government they were going to get ready to change policy. Just in talk, our government was going to direct their attention only at getting rid of Assad and forget about these rebels because they're not doing a very good job, and yet. Who would ever believe there's any Democrat or any Republican that isn't super gun-ho to get rid of ISIS, and the American people are with them, unfortunately, because they're irrational at times about this. Yeah. They're with them, but then again, on real policy, they don't want, if the Russians or the Iranians go after al-Qaeda or after ISIS, they object to it. So it is, I think our policy is schizophrenic, to tell you the truth.
And I wrote a little piece yesterday because I watched the press spokesman of the Pentagon do his daily press briefing, and it was astonishing. And even the people there who are used to this were pretty surprised because essentially, Peter Cook, I believe his name is, essentially what the spokesman said was that we are establishing a no-fly zone over parts of Syria. And he specifically warned Russia and Syria against flying in the area when the U.S. or its coalition is operating within Syria. And that's a major, major shift, I think. And it changes a lot of things on the ground. But, the U.S. is working with the YPG, the Kurdish militias, in that area. And they've been firing at Assad's forces. And then when Assad's forces fire back, they're attacked. But now Turkey is firing on the YPG that the U.S. is backing. So it's like alles gegen alles. Everyone is fighting everyone in Syria.
Yeah, and I watch part of that as well. And the State Department person, the early part of it sounded pretty good. Well, we're working for peace and we're working for this. Outsiders should stay out. Until the conclusion was, well, what we need to do is get those Russians to quit supporting Assad, and quit supporting. He wouldn't say the word, but we're for regime change. It's our job, So they say one thing, and I thought, well, this sounds this is typical, the politicians. They say one thing, they mean something else, and then they contradict everything they claim they believe in. They contradict it, and they have a different policy.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct.
There was one statement made by a group in Iran that I found fascinating, and they sort of were questioning whether or not they should have the Russian planes landing there, which is, certainly their prerogative on debating it at home. But the group said that just possibly we should reassess this because it's anti-constitutionalist. And I thought, that's interesting. They have people that, even though on the surface it may look like it's in their best interest, this group and this individual saying, well, it looks like it could be anti-constitutional. It's like maybe they should get more permission, and maybe their constitution says you have to have a declaration of war. And I thought, well, it's too bad that we don't have a few people in Washington thinking along those lines.
Yeah, it was an interesting story because, we're told that Iran's parliament is sort of a monolithic structure that is heeding the Ayatollah. But here, there seems to be a pretty good debate, not only about whether it's constitutional to allow the Russians to use the base, but also the issue of civilian control of the military, because I think the Speaker of Parliament, Larjani's put down of this general was basically keep in your place. You don't have a role to talk about this policy. And it's amazing they're talking about their constitution where we have troops on the ground in Syria completely unconstitutional.
But we're spreading our exceptionalism, and we're spreading democracy, and we're spreading peace and prosperity, so we can't be challenged. Unless you're a patriotic American, then you should be permitted to challenge policy, but that's another story. Okay, I want to go on to item number 2, which I mentioned at the opening, and that has to do with this working paper by one of the Federal Reserve Board staff people, and it came out, they released it, and it's preparing the people for what's coming. You know, the Fed and others are meeting at Jackson Hole this weekend to solve all the monetary problems of the world, and everything will be okay next week. But just in case there's a downturn, they're recognizing that they don't have much leeway to deal with a downturn. They know a downturn's coming. Everybody knows that they always come because it's inevitable to have a downturn after you have an artificial boom time. And the Fed creates that, so they have a guarantee the downturn. It's just a matter of when it's coming and what exactly will precipitate it. I believe it's already started in many areas of the economy. Anyway, they're preparing for this, and they want to assure the people that they're on top of it and they're thinking about it. So their proposal is not completely new. That might take about another $4 trillion of QE. So they have a problem there, but I'm sure that you're reassured that things will work out okay and that your kids will grow up and be able to get their education and a good job, and we won't have to worry about a healthy economy.
I don't know that $4 trillion is going to find its way, any of it, into our bank accounts.
Yeah.
But, you know, I was reading this morning, too, and the first thing I thought is this is what you warned, you know, well, forever, of course, but certainly back when they started slashing the rates, you said this is not working. You're going to get to the point where you're backed up against a wall and there's nowhere left to cut. This is exactly what the Fed said in this memo you talked about. Right,
and you know the word thrown out, you know, even by our opposition. Well, and I think our friend Paul Krugman might have used those words, that we might have to use helicopter money to just drop it on the people, because that's where their shortcoming comes up. They can inject money into the financial system, but they have no way of knowing where it's going to go. And right now, it has not gone to the people, even though their prime concern was the stock market and Wall Street. But they were hoping, I'm sure they don't want a lousy economy, they were hoping that people would feel wealthier and you will go out and spend money and businesses will come back. They have no idea how the economic cycles work, and that you have to liquidate bad investments and bad debt. No, they just print more money. But they've taken it down to zero. And they don't have many options, so they have to think about helicopter money. I can't quite visualize. I mean, I think it's a good example how to think about it, but literally it's not true that they use helicopters. But I think what they're talking about is how do they get the money into the hands of the people so that they spend more money. And there's a lot of ways. The welfare state does that. They're never going to stop Social Security. Unemployment benefits are always going to come. If Obamacare flops like it is, and there's no and the private companies go broke because it was an insane problem, well, the government's going to take over. They're always going to produce money, you know, cash out of thin air, and they will be able to spend it. And that already is an example, because where they spend the most is where the most inflation is, and that is in education and medical care. So they will do that. And the one thing along with the $4 trillion is I believe that as time goes on and the next president is going to have to deal with it, we're going to have a sharp downturn, and neither candidate right now says, you know, what we really should do is spend less money. You know, we should cut back a little bit. You know, when it comes to infrastructure, they're one-upping each other. You know, they say we have to spend the money, and that sounds good on the surface. They think that's going to help, but it never has helped before, and yet this is what they're going to offer. But they're going to offer a lot more spending. Matter of fact, the spending is going to be automatic, because if more people become unemployed and more people go on food stamps, even though there's been a recovery for a long time, there's not that many. I don't think there's any less people getting food stamps. Nobody quits getting food stamps. They might go and get a part-time job or something, but the food stamps and the housing assistance and the medical assistance, it continues, and it will continue until this insanity ends. with people saying, well, this is crazy. You know, this whole idea of zero rate interest rates is so absurd. And you know, most good economists and most that understand a little history, in particular Jim Grant, he says this hasn't happened in 5,000 years, and they have no leeway. The old conventional thing of mischief and manipulating and economic planning and getting us out of recessions, that can be done to a degree, but eventually people lose confidence in the money.
You were mentioning before we came on that I think it was Grant had something about this strange relationship between the stock market and bonds. You know, it's
yeah. You know, he was saying, well, how can this is a strange world. He was making the point the stocks are at record highs and bonds are at the record low. And the interest rates are so low, and the low interest rate represents depression. He says this is worse than the Great Depression when you look at the bond interest rates and the stock market says there's great prosperity. So we're living under very special conditions. I wish it weren't so serious because it's really entertaining to think about all the ramifications of this and how is this going to play out. But unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of people suffering. I think a lot of people are suffering, and I think that's why 65 to 70% of the American people are already angry, in spite of the fact that you look out there and there's great prosperity and the stocks are going high. And it was also recently made a point about one group of people who are really buying into our stock market, and that's the Swiss National Bank. You know, they create their credit out of thin air, and they're buying stocks hand over fist, and they're not buying cheap stocks, they're buying good stocks. So that has to be beneficial to the stock market. But I believe that that's more than just one country that does that, because I believe that because we're not allowed to know what the Fed does internationally, I believe there's a lot of mischief on what we do with big banks and foreign governments and foreign central banks. And I believe it's in the world's interest to keep our economy going and the dollar solvent. Even though some are angry and foreigners are buying our bonds and our treasuries less so, there's still an interest. I don't think, I cannot conceive of something happening in Jackson Hole this weekend that's an attack on the dollar that stands up to the United States. Look, we're sick and tired of you exporting your inflation, giving us your pieces of paper, and you want us to keep sending you your oil and our cheap products. You know, they're not going to say that, because everybody's in bed with this system, and those who aren't will be punished because we control the financial system. We can put sanctions on them. We can deny them their defenses because we promised to defend their country. So that's going to, they're not going to have a problem there. And nor will the suggestion and the reassurance that, well, if we run into this trouble, we can pump out another $4 trillion. Well, one day we'll notice that'll come to an end.
It makes you wonder, the average person would see that $4 trillion and your eyes would glaze over. But what would you tell them when they say, well, how is this going to affect me if this $4 trillion is pumped into the economy?
Well, what's going to happen is eventually people will see that the dollar is losing real value and interest rates will go up, and there'll be a lot of inflation. There'll be price inflation, and there is a lot of price inflation, but it'll be to the degree that if you have a currency inflation, that's the type of thing Zimbabwe has and Venezuela have. They know how to use helicopters, and they put the money in the hands of the people. But that will not create investments in good businesses. That's not going to all of a sudden we're going to get steel mills back or something like that. It will just bid up the prices. It'll go into that, just like today. In these last 8 years or so, the money has gone in. Stocks have done well. Houses are back doing well, especially very, very expensive houses. Farm real estate has skyrocketed. People expect a correction on that, and expensive houses, they have gone very high. And like I said, education is going to continue to skyrocket. And as Obamacare breaks down, you're going to see a real mess, trying to get health care. And it will be people who can afford it, and the price will go up. And so the people will suffer. The main rule that people have to face up to on currency debasement. First, it destroys the middle class, and second, the prices go up for the poor and the middle class, and they suffer the most. And then you combine that with a weak economy. The more the government does. See, right now, if they have unemployment insurance and pump more money into Social Security, you say, well, that's good. But there will be a point when that doesn't do any good. And if the $4 trillion already didn't help, now they're planning another $4 trillion. They'll get to a point where once you get, well, let's do $8 trillion. All of a sudden, people say, nobody wants this money, and that's when you're going to see this. And people are going to suffer, and there is no answer. It's much easier preventing this problem than it is taking care of it. And once it hits, the most important thing is allowing the correction to occur. Get off this kick that spending will solve our problems, printing will solve our problems, debt, they claim, doesn't matter. You have to get over that. You have to try to eliminate the mistakes, just like an individual who's trying to get back on their feet again in an ordinary economy, but all they have is debt. They work, and all they do is pay debt. They have to liquidate debt one way or the other, and the market will liquidate the debt. They will not liquidate the debt by not paying people who have treasury bills. It will be liquidated through inflation, and that's what the Fed is desperately trying to do, is liquidate debt through that means. But the market isn't working quite the way they think it should. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. I was delighted that we could cover two subjects today. First, the subject of whether or not the Russians will continue to use the Iranian bases, and also the subject of the Fed's willingness and plans and reassurance to the people. Don't sweat it. There is a recession probably coming, not in the not too distant future, and they will print the money, and they will need at least $4 trillion. And of course, there will be a major meeting this weekend at Jackson Hole. The central bankers will be there. Our Federal Reserve will be there. You'll hear some fancy speeches. There'll be reassurance. There will not, in my prediction, be an attack on the dollar. There will be reassurance. Everything they'll say will be designed to give reassurance to the stock market and to the dollar. I don't believe there's going to be an attack on the dollar. The market will attack the dollar when the time comes. It has to be attacked and knocked down. In that case, then what will happen is we will have true monetary reform. The Fed will self-destruct, and our efforts to reform the system, have honest money, which is associated with liberty, that will be the result. Hopefully that day will come soon. I wish we could do it sooner to prevent the many hardships that will come on the road that we are going on today. Thank you very much for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.